When someone begins reading the Old Testament, it's easy to quickly become confused when coming to the legal material presented in the Pentateuch, or Torah. It can be confusing first because we're not always sure of what to do with this material, and second, we have repetition of some of this material in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. How should we make sense of this? In addressing this question, we need to start by noting the purpose of the legal material and the context in which it's given. In the narrative of the Pentateuch, we see the election of Israel as the means by which Yahweh is going to address the problem of sin and the effects it has on the created order. In Genesis 12, Yahweh determines that he's going to use the descendants of Abram as the human means by which he'll address the disruption of the created order caused by the unwillingness of human beings to be content with their unique status as image bearers of God. Despite being more like God than any other creature, they wanted equality with God. In response to this rebellion, God selects Abram and his descendants as the means by which he's going to begin his work of restoration of creation. As you probably recall, God's restorative work unfolds slowly. The promise made originally to Abraham is then passed down to Isaac and then to Jacob. Eventually, the Israelites end up in Egypt, where they multiply and become a great nation. This frightens the Egyptians, who enslave them to ensure the Israelites don't become a threat to the security of Egypt. Finally, God delivers the Israelites from Egypt in the Exodus and begins the process of bringing them to the land he had promised to Abram back in Genesis 15, some 700 years earlier. Following 430 years in Egypt and the experience of slavery, God brings Israel out of Egypt and to Sinai. There, he begins to establish and constitute the people as a nation, one with the unique calling and mission to be the people of God. Israel is to live out relationship with God on the world's stage, to demonstrate to a watching world what it means to be human in relationship with God. Through this act of witness, Israel is to invite the nations to become a part of the community of the people of God. Why does all this matter as we think about the laws of the Torah? Because this is the context of the laws. The laws are God's instruction to the people of how they're to live as the people of God. Rather than just leaving the people to figure out on their own what he expects of them and how they're to live out their calling to be a witness to the nations, God instead gives instructions as to how they're to live. This begins in the book of Exodus. Following the giving of the Ten Commandments, God through Moses provides instructions as to how the Israelites were to live out relationship with God. These instructions are all-encompassing, addressing and affecting every aspect of life. For the Israelites, no part of life was outside the boundaries of their relationship with Yahweh. So, in matters big and small, the people were to live as the people of God. The all-encompassing nature of the laws may be seen in the fact that the instructions range from how they're to foster a just society to regulating the foods that the people eat. We see in Exodus chapter 22, verses 25 through 27, for example, that the poor are not to be exploited. This passage says, "If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it by sunset, because that cloak is the only covering your neighbor has. What else can they sleep in? When they cry out to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate." Charging interest to the needy or holding a pledge are practices inconsistent with the kind of society that Yahweh wants Israel to reflect as they point to his presence. In verse 31 of the same chapter, the people are forbidden to eat meat torn apart by wild animals. That's improper for a holy people. In the same way, the kosher food laws of Leviticus 11 regulate the foods that the people of God are allowed to eat. These regulations are not about health or hygiene, but they serve as a constant reminder to the people that they've been set apart and they're to eat and to drink as the people of God. The purpose of the instructions in the Torah, then, is not to tell the people how it is that they're to earn salvation or a relationship with God. Rather, the instructions of Torah serve to tell the people how they're to live out relationship with God, particularly in light of their calling to be a witness to the nations. In short, at Sinai, God gives instructions to the people that serve to foster a particular worldview on their part. He's telling them how they should see the world and how they should live as the people of God. Rather than giving them a scorecard for how they can earn salvation, the instructions given at Sinai are meant to help the people know how they should live out relationship with God and how they can succeed at being his people. It's part of fostering awareness on the part of the people of their special status and their high calling, both of which are intended ultimately to be for the benefit of the nations who are watching. What then do we do with a book like Deuteronomy? The fifth book of the Pentateuch seems like a repetition of material that came earlier. There's a second recitation of the Ten Commandments, and many of the laws in Deuteronomy are found elsewhere in the Torah. How should we approach and understand this? Here again, we need to look at the context and what the book says about what's going on. The book of Deuteronomy opens with the description that these are the words Moses spoke to all Israel in the wilderness east of the Jordan. It further notes that Moses spoke these words in the 40th year on the first day of the 11th month, and that this was after the conquest of the Canaanite kings Sihon and Og. While this presents similar materials as that found in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, the audience of the speeches recorded in Deuteronomy is not the same. This is somewhat similar to what we see elsewhere in the Bible, such as the two presentations of Israel's history addressed to different audiences in the books of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. In the same way, the three synoptic Gospels of the New Testament present the same history to different audiences. Remember that the first generation of Israelites died out in the wilderness. Following their time at Sinai, God led the people from Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, to the front door of the Promised Land. Moses sent spies into the land who brought back reports of a land flowing with milk and honey, but that there were giants in the land and that the land devoured its inhabitants. The people rebelled against God and refused to take the land. As a result, God condemned that generation to die in the wilderness. They would not enter the Promised Land. 40 years after the Exodus, the first generation had died out. Deuteronomy describes the next generation, the children of the Exodus generation, gathering once again on the verge of the Promised Land. This time, though, they're at the back door to the Promised Land, on the plains of Moab. And like their parents, they face a choice. Will they obey Yahweh and enter the land, and in that way live out their role in God's great restoration project? Or would they, as their parents did, rebel? In this context, Moses addresses the people. The book of Deuteronomy records speeches of Moses that are addressed to this new generation of Israelites at the back door to the Promised Land. He himself is condemned to die without entering the land, so he seeks to give them what they need to know to be able to take the land and to be the people of God without him. The book presents Moses' farewell addresses. The speeches are his last best chance to tell the people what they need to know in order to live successfully as the people of God and fulfill their mission. Part of his exhortation to the people includes legal material, much of which is a distillation of instructions found in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. Rather than simply repeat the earlier instructions, Moses in Deuteronomy incorporates that material into his exhortations, using it to cast a vision for this new audience of what it means for them to live as the people of God. We see in Deuteronomy a greater passion and a sense of urgency, even as similar ideas are developed. In Deuteronomy 16, verses 18 through 20, it says, "Appoint judges and officials for each of your tribes in every town Yahweh your God is giving you, and they shall judge the people fairly. Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the innocent. Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land Yahweh your God is giving you." Here, the call to appoint judges is followed by an exhortation to pursue justice. But that call to follow justice is not addressed to the judges that will be appointed, but rather it's addressed to the community that's going to appoint them. This highlights that the call to establish a radically countercultural society, which is present in the earlier laws of the Torah, is of particular urgency in Deuteronomy. As with the earlier laws, these instructions are not given as the means by which relationship with God is earned. Here again, the laws are given to instruct this new audience on how they should live in light of their relationship with God. That message is tailored to address the needs of a different audience. Understanding the instructions of the Torah properly means having an understanding of the context and setting in which the instructions appear. Though they're similar to each other, the laws of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers on the one hand, and those of Deuteronomy on the other, are addressed to different audiences, and the author had different purposes in presenting them as he did. Taking note of that will help us be better interpreters of the text and allow us to better identify and understand the communicative intention of the author.